The Lilydale line is a 39-kilometre broad-gauge electrified suburban railway running from central Melbourne out through the wealthy inner eastern suburbs of Hawthorn and Camberwell to the bustling shopping centre at Box Hill, through Blackburn, Mitcham and Ringwood, then continuing out through leafy suburbia to the former junction station of Lilydale on the edge of the Yarra Valley. The Lilydale line is part of what's known internally as the Burnley Group, which is everything dark blue on the network map, made up of the Lilydale, Belgrave, Glenwaverley and Alamein lines, and the inner part of the group is extremely busy, with 4 tracks out to Burnley and triple track as far as Box Hill. In this video, we're going to take a look at the Burnley Group's second longest line in detail, including a bit of history and interesting features you can see along the line today. All footage and photographs used in this video are my own, unless mentioned otherwise on screen. The Lilydale line begins at Flinders Street Station, with trains usually departing from platforms 2 and 3, with occasional appearances over on 4. Burnley Group trains run around the City Loop in the Burnley Tunnel, which is the platform 4s at Parliament, Melbourne Central and Flagstaff. At Southern Cross it runs through platform 10, and then over the Burnley Group track on the Flinders Street Viaduct, which is the second from northernmost track on the oldest part of the viaduct dating from 1891. The Burnley Group is one of the 2 remaining groups which still do the extremely Melbourne thing of reversing direction through the loop halfway through the day. Trains run anti-clockwise on weekday mornings, changing to run clockwise in the afternoon, and it's clockwise all day on weekends. Immediately east of the CBD, the group runs alongside nearly every other eastern line out to Richmond Junction, passing the south side of the MCG, home of Aussie Rules footy. Last time I said that in a video, a lot of people complained that I was ignoring the C in MCG, so I will mention this was also the birthplace of Test cricket in 1877. The first railway on this site opened through here in February 1859, and by March of that year, apparently a small station was opened on approximately this site called Botanic Gardens. Trains only stopped here on Wednesdays, Saturday and Sunday afternoons, and it was presumably mostly for passengers attending games at the MCG, which had opened 6 years earlier. The name Botanic Gardens doesn't really make sense, as the gardens are on the other side of the Yarra from here, and I think the only nearby bridge at the time was Prince's Bridge, so this is not where you'd leave the train if you wanted to go there. It's not entirely clear how long this station lasted, but I'm assuming it closed pretty early on. The 4 Burnley Group tracks at this point are the down through line, the up through, down local and up local. Up means towards the city, down means towards the country, and through and local are essentially express and non-express, though that's not really a hard division at this point. There's a few operational things to note here, which we will do using this now quite historic diagram I drew for my Richmond Junction video 4 years ago. It's possible to bring trains across to the Burnley Group from any platform at Flinders Street, but that connection is only with the local lines. You can't get to the through lines from anything above platform 3. Meanwhile, the entrance to the City Loop is just here in between the through lines. You can't access the tunnel from the local lines. So there are quite a lot of Burnley Group trains timetabled to run in and out of Flinders Street on this track pair which don't go around the loop. Just before arriving at Richmond Station, the down local jumps over the through lines on this flyover, reshuffling the tracks into down down up up for the remainder of the quad track running out to Burnley. You can get a great view of trains running over the flyover thanks to this conveniently placed footbridge. Richmond Station has 10 platforms, making it the 3rd largest in the state after Southern Cross and Flinders Street, and the Burnley Group runs through platforms 7 to 10. The first station in this area opened in February 1859 when the line was built from Prince's Bridge to a terminus called Punt Road on the western side of Punt Road, which was only about 300 metres from the station at Botanic Gardens. The government required that the railway be built over Punt Road on a bridge, and it seems that Punt Road, the station, was just a temporary arrangement while the bridge over Punt Road, the road, was being built. Given the whole line was only 2 kilometres long at this stage, it would be interesting to know how many people forked out money for a ticket rather than just walking, though I suppose the novelty value would have been very high. The bridge was completed 10 months later in December as part of the line extension towards Windsor and Brighton, and Punt Road Station was replaced by a new double-track station further to the east near Swan Street, called Swan Street, renamed to Richmond in 1867. In 1885, the station was completely rebuilt at an elevated level with 6 curved platforms, grade separating Swan Street in the process. In the late 50s, the station was completely rebuilt again, this time with 10 platforms, and moved further west onto the straight section straddling Punt Road. And this is the station we know and love today. Punt Road is home to the 246 bus, which must be one of Melbourne's straightest bus routes, running in a more or less dead straight line for 10 kilometres from Elwood to Clifton Hill. The main station entrance is on the southeast side on Swan Street and is very underwhelming. You could almost not notice Melbourne's 3rd largest station sitting right there. It connects to the platforms via a pedestrian subway, which is split in two by a fence, allowing an unpaid pedestrian route under the station, as well as the paid area towards the platforms. The ramps leading up to the platforms feature some wonderful 1950s colour-coded tiles. Platform 1 and 2's ramp is sort of green, 3 and 4's is salmon, 5 and 6 is pale yellow, 7 and 8 is kind of baby blue, and 9 and 10 is a slightly more orange salmon. I'm not sure if these colours ever actually lined up with anything or had any greater meaning. I don't believe there was any colour coding in the maps or timetables of the time, so it might have just been purely to provide visual distinction within the station itself. There's another smaller subway in the middle of the platforms, which has no exits and is for platform interchange only, and it also features the same coloured tiles. There's a third subway at the western end of the platforms, the exit for which is infuriatingly only open during sporting events, and at other times is available for platform interchange only. This really sucks, as anyone wanting to walk to the west at non-sporting times not only has an indirect route, but also has to cross Punt Road at ground level. Grade separation is rarely a priority in this city when it comes to pedestrians. All 10 tracks then curve away to the south, crossing Swan Street and the Route 70 tram on a series of 5 double-track steel girder bridges. It's here that the 4 Burnley Group tracks split off from the rest of the lines which head off south towards South Yarra, and there are no crossovers here. If you wanted a different track, you needed to do it back at Richmond Junction. The line curves back towards the east, passing the back of several popular Richmond venues, including the Richmond Club Hotel, which has great views of passing trains from their upstairs area. Something that had never previously occurred to me is that the Burnley Freeway Tunnel is directly below the line here. I only noticed this because I accidentally dragged the Google Street View guy into it while working on this part of the video. The line then arrives into East Richmond, which regular Burnley Group commuters will know from this popular announcement.
Services departing Heatherdale, Platform 1 are the 1242 Flinders Street, stopping all stations to Flinders Street except East Richmond.
The reason you'll hear that announcement a lot is that a lot of trains, including nearly all to Belgrave and Lilydale, run express through here. East Richmond only has 2 platforms positioned on the local lines only, so trains on the through lines have no choice but to run express. While this kind of arrangement is pretty common in many places around the world, East Richmond is actually the only station in Melbourne with this exact layout. The fact that a lot of passengers hear the
"Except East Richmond"
announcement on almost every trip they take has given the phrase a bit of a cult following and has generated a bit of a myth that no trains ever stop here, or perhaps only very rarely. And I've spoken to a lot of people who seem to genuinely believe this. However, nearly all Glen Waverley line trains stop here, giving it a 20-minute off-peak frequency and 7 minutes during the peak, so it actually gets a pretty normal service level. And there are a very small handful of Lilydale and Belgrave trains that do stop here. There are a couple of crossovers just before the platforms, providing a connection between the through and local lines, and specifically this allows a train to stop at East Richmond, then run into the City Loop, which remember is only accessible from the through lines. So these crossovers do get a lot of use. At the down end of the station is a bridge carrying Church Street, a busy north-south corridor and home of tram Route 78. This is a good example of how passenger connections between trains and trams in Melbourne are often surprisingly terrible. The southbound tram stop is just over here on the bridge, but the nearest pedestrian crossing is 100 metres away, making a 200-metre walk from the tram to the station entrance. East Richmond opened with this part of the line in 1860 and was originally named Church Street, changing to the current name 7 years later. I feel like Church Street might have been a more distinctive name to have kept long term, given that the suburb of Richmond has the most stations carrying its name of anywhere on the system. I can only think of one other suburb which historically had 4 stations carrying its name, that being Williamstown. The brick building on the down platform looks like it was once quite nice, but today feels a bit run down and is painted a rather dull grey-green colour. It does still have a waiting room which is open for passenger use, and there's an unusual emergency escape option should you require it. Something else unusual here is that the upside station building is quite a bit less substantial than the downside one, and also looks a lot newer. This is because the down platform is the original one from the double track era, and when the line was quadruplicated in the mid-60s, the old up platform was demolished to make way for the additional tracks, with a new platform and building being built for the new up local line. The down platform has this quite nice garden within the paid area, which is pretty uncommon in Melbourne. Next to the garden, there's also a little coacting signal for down trains, one of relatively few located entirely on a platform. Hey there, little guy. Beyond East Richmond, the 4 tracks continue in a wide cutting for the next half a kilometre, passing under a footbridge, and you can clearly see the original sloped cutting on the downside covered in vegetation, compared to the 1960s quadruplication concrete wall on the upside. There are 2 more road bridges, Mary Street and Coppin Street, then the line returns to ground level, passing under Burnley Street and arriving into the station which gives the Burnley Group its name. Any guesses? Burnley. This station opened in 1880 and was initially called Burnley Street, losing the street part 2 years later. As you'll know from my other videos in this series, there was a bit of an obsession with renaming stations in the 19th century. And on this particular line, the pattern was that stations opened named after a nearby street, but were fairly rapidly renamed to remove the specific street reference. Burnley is the end of the quadruple track, and it's also the junction for the line to Glen Waverley. It has 4 platforms made up of 2 islands, which allows for a cross-platform interchange between trains travelling in the same direction, which is specifically useful for swapping between trains running via the City Loop or direct to Flinders Street. At the up end are a small number of crossovers between the through and local lines, but none in the middle between the up and down, so you can't terminate a down train in the platform and return to the city. There is a rarely used siding branching off the down local, a former goods siding which is now mostly just used for stabling track machines. It is electrified and is long enough to fit a 6-car suburban train, but doesn't have security fencing, and I've never seen a passenger train in there. Between the 2 up lines is a signal box dating from the 1960s quadruplication, which, according to this piece of paper, celebrated its 50th birthday in 2016. At the down end, the double-track Glen Waverley line branches off to the south, grade separated by a flyover, and just around the corner are the Burnley stabling sidings, with space for 6 6-car trains. The main line continuing towards Box Hill is triple track from here. There's the down line and the up line, which are for trains travelling in those directions only. Then the centre line is bidirectional and is typically used by trains travelling towards the city in the morning and away in the afternoon, meaning express trains have an opportunity to overtake locals as long as they're travelling in the peak direction. There are quite a few crossovers allowing trains from platform 4 to access the down line, centre line or the Glen Waverley line. However, trains on platform 3 can't get to the down line. Up trains from the centre line can only access platform 2, though they can then get to the local line at the other end of the station if need be. Up trains from Glen Waverley, meanwhile, can only access the local line. Trains from the up line can terminate in platform 2 and return to the centre line, while trains on the centre line can terminate in 4 and return to the down line, or head towards Glen Waverley. You can also terminate a train from the centre line in 2 or 4 and return back to the centre line, assuming there are no trains following. While down trains can't terminate in the platforms, they can head into the sidings and return to the city from there. In this 2003 picture, you can see that someone has left a reminder for the state government to stop timber logging in our water catchments, and it's a very enduring piece of graffiti, looking essentially unchanged 23 years later, and the practice it refers to was still occasionally happening until at least 2024. Looking off the down end of platforms 3 and 4, you might notice a couple of these black discs with white lines on them. I explained what these are in my Werribee Line video, but for anyone who hasn't watched that yet, these boards were instructions for drivers of early electric trains advising which position to place the master controller in when departing stations. In this case, the 2 lines sloping down to the right indicate the series position, essentially half power. Then at the base of the flyover, there's the opposite, 2 lines sloping up to the right indicating series parallel position, or full power. The only reason I'm mentioning these here is that this particular style with the lines painted on a black disc is still really widespread on the Burnley group, despite being obsolete for at least 50 years. And once you know what you're looking at, you'll start seeing them everywhere. The Glen Waverley line flyover was built in 1943, separating down Glen Waverley trains from up Box Hill trains, and it's quite an interesting brick, concrete and steel structure. The flyover is more or less parallel with the Swan Street Road Bridge carrying the Route 70 tram. The triangle of land in the middle of the junction is called the Burnley Circus Park, and as the name suggests, there's sometimes a circus there. But most of the time the park is circusless, and it's an interesting place to stand with views of electric rail transport in nearly every direction. This is probably as good a place as any to take a bit more of a look at the early history of the line, as it was briefly the terminus for 7 months in 1859 at a small station called Picnic, usually written with a hyphen and obviously named after a likely activity in the area. The very earliest railways in Victoria were built by private companies, and the first part of what is now the Burnley Group was built by the Melbourne and Suburban Railway Company, who built the line out to Hawthorn, as well as the line down to Windsor and Brighton in several small stages. After the line had been extended across Punt Road in December 1859, work began on the branch towards Hawthorn, and by September of the next year, trains were running as far as Picnic, just shy of the planned terminus. This was obviously not a very useful place for the line to end, unless you were a picnicker, and it was only a terminus temporarily due to delays with construction of the large bridge over the Yarra River into Hawthorn. My trusty copy of VR to 62 told me the bridge was built by a Mr. Goldsack and Company, but I later sadly discovered it was actually built by the much less amusingly named George Cornwell and Co. 7 months later, in April 1861, Cornwell had got the job done and the railway finally reached its intended terminus of Hawthorn. The Melbourne and Suburban Railway Company only lasted 1 more year before being taken over by the similarly named Melbourne Railway Company, which only lasted 3 years before merging with the Melbourne and Hobsons Bay Railway Company, who ran the St Kilda and Port Melbourne lines to form the Melbourne and Hobsons Bay United Railway Company. Now that the one company owned lines on both sides of Swanston Street, a short connection was built between Princes Bridge and Flinders Street stations, allowing Hawthorn trains to depart from Flinders Street. The Melbourne and Hobsons Bay United managed to last a full 13 years before finally selling up to the government, with their small network being absorbed into the Victorian Railways, who would run these lines for the next 105 years. Today, the bridge over the Yarra is an impressive structure, with a large steel lattice girder supported on large bluestone abutments, and there's also a short span passing over Yarra Boulevard at the up end. What we see here is not the original bridge, but a new one built in 1912, with the part over the road added in 1938. When the 1912 bridge was built, it was constructed slightly to the north of the original 1860s bridge, allowing rail traffic to continue operating during construction. Then when the third track was added through here in 1972, the new girder for that was added to the south of the 1912 bridge, reusing part of the original 1860s bluestone abutment, which was still in place and clearly still has space for a fourth track if that ever happens. Beyond the bridge, the line continues into a short cutting passing under Yarra Street, as opposed to Yarra Boulevard, then shortly arrives into Hawthorn Station, which was the terminus of the line for a full 21 years, from 1861 until the line was extended all the way to Lilydale in 1882. Hawthorn is absolutely beautiful, and unlike any other station in Melbourne. The up platform features this large timber building dating from the 1880s, painted dark brown and burgundy. But perhaps this station's most notable feature is this huge canopy over platforms 2 and 3. It was installed here in 1890, but wasn't brand new at the time. It was relocated from the original Flinders Street station, which was in the process of being rebuilt into what we know today. Here's a picture showing its original location. 1890 might seem very early for Hawthorn to have had 3 platforms, and it was in fact over 70 years before the triple track would come through here. But the original purpose of the third platform was for the short branch line to Kew, which operated between 1887 and 1957. The Kew line branched off on the upside of Hawthorn, having exclusive use of platform 3, then ran alongside the main line for about 500 metres before diverging away to the north. After the Kew line closed, it was just 6 years before the first part of the triple track was installed from here to Camberwell, conveniently making use of the existing third platform and the Kew line alignment on the downside of the station. Historically, there were several goods sidings here. One ran alongside the platform 3 track, and you can still clearly see the space where that was located. Hawthorn features several of these large black and white station signs, which were a standard Victorian Railways design and once widespread across the system. But I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this is the only suburban station that still has them. There's this prominent one on platform 1, and also this double-sided one attached to this cool wooden bench structure on the island platform. Yet another unique feature of this station is this unusual covered footbridge, which feels like a very British design to me, really built to shelter from the weather. The catch is that it's not a very good bridge to photograph trains from, unless you get a little bit creative. Part of the large Platform 1 building is used as a depot for authorised officers, ticket inspectors, and they even have their own little barbecue area outside. At the down end of the station is the Burwood Road Bridge, which carries tram route 75, and in typical Victorian style, the tram stop is nowhere near the station entrance. It's all the way up there. But that aside, can we just take a quick moment to appreciate the excellent timing of this shot? Sometimes, things just work. The ramp down to the island platform from Burwood Road has these lovely cast iron railings, and at the bottom there's these timber gates with alarming spikes on the top, dating from when the VR used to close off access to the platform as trains were departing. I'm almost reluctant to move on from this station, it's really nice. Alright, come on, let's go. The line curves around under a couple of bridges carrying Elgin and Power streets and begins to climb a 1 in 50 grade. And it's really non-stop hills one way or the other all the way to Lilydale from here. There's not much to see where the queue line branched off, though if you pause your vision at just the right moment, you'll get a glimpse of Hilda Crescent, which follows the curve of the line's alignment. In the 1910s, the VR was preparing to electrify the suburban network, along with a huge increase in service, and they embarked on quite a few significant projects of station rebuilds and grade separations. The next 2.7 kilometres or so of this line was one such project, being completely rebuilt around 1915, partly elevated and partly below street level, removing, I think, 8 level crossings, including one with a tram line, and rebuilding 3 stations, Glenferrie, Auburn and Camberwell. A massive project with a scope to rival even the most major grade separations we see today. The line passes over Glenferrie Road, a very busy shopping strip carrying tram route 16, then arrives into Glenferrie Station, which I also really like, so I decided it deserved to be shown in better weather than this. Sometimes it doesn't work on the first try. That's better. Glenferrie opened with the line in 1882 and, like so many other stations of the time, was initially named Glenferrie Road, with the road part being dropped from the name just 5 months later. Glenferrie isn't a suburb name, we're still in Hawthorn here. The current station buildings date from the 1910s when this section was elevated, and it's a wonderful example of Melbourne's electrification era architecture, built at a time when there was huge optimism for the future of the system, and that optimism was not unfounded. Here we are over a century later and still enjoying the benefits of electric train travel, even with the original overhead wiring poles here. It's my slightly controversial opinion that this era was basically the peak for Melbourne station design. The buildings look beautiful, there are large shelters covering large parts of the platforms, and there are waiting rooms on the platforms, close enough that you don't have to worry about not noticing your train arriving, unlike a lot of modern waiting rooms that are nowhere near the platforms. There's a lot of seating in the form of these long wooden benches, and the wide ramps up to the platforms are very high capacity. Honestly, the only major thing I think this station is missing in the modern world is a lift, and that would be pretty easy to retrofit. Something I was curious about here is how the island platform looks like it was always an island platform, with the big ramp and shelter in the middle, despite the fact that Platform 1 wasn't added until the 1960s when the third track was put in. It seems like when the station was rebuilt for electrification, they must have already had the third track in mind and built the station accordingly. I had this confirmed when I discovered this painting in the State Library Victoria collection, which shows Glenferrie in approximately 1934. You can see the line here is double track using what are today platforms 2 and 3, and the future Platform 1 is already partly formed, despite the third track still being 3 decades away. Have a look at how the end of this brick building stands on the side of the embankment. I couldn't get to quite the same position, but this is how it looks today, with the rest of the island platform filled in around it. On the north side of the station is a narrow alleyway filled with shops and cafes, including one incorporated into the station itself. It was quite common in that era to design stations with retail spaces for the railway to hire out, just as it is today. There's also this interesting little arcade with a partly clear roof and a pressed tin ceiling. It was looking a bit sad during my visit with several vacant shop fronts, but I believe it was just about to undergo a renovation, so hopefully it'll look a bit happier in the near future. The bridges over Glenferrie Road are riveted steel, painted that lovely Victorian Railway's red-brown colour, and have really stood the test of time. These are the original girders put in place when the line was elevated 110 years ago. Interestingly, the single track bridge which was added in the 60s for the triple track is almost the same design as the original double track span, with only a few small variations, despite being about half a century younger. This is another good example of retail spaces being included in the infrastructure, with a number of small shops squeezed in between the bridges. The connection to tram route 16 here is, in traditional Melbourne fashion, unreasonably bad, with northbound trams stopping all the way there. Are you starting to notice a pattern with this? It's inconsistent here too. The southbound stop is about 20,000 times better, stopping at the actual station entrance. And the footpath is actually built out there to provide a sort of pseudo-platform arrangement, blocking cars from passing between the tram and the curb, as is common at many other Melbourne tram stops. Weirdly, it looks like the footpath on the northbound side actually received the same treatment, even with the paving delineating the platform area from the rest of the footpath, but the actual tram stop was never moved here. Google Earth tells me it's been like that since at least 2007 too. Heading back to the station, on the south side there's another little alleyway full of shops, and in case you hadn't realised how trendy we are here, there's an urban man barber and a record store / coffee shop. Also, the station entrance on this side has one of the most inconveniently placed advertising screens I've ever seen. Away from Glenferrie Road to the east, the station is surrounded by Swinburne University of Technology, probably the biggest generator of patronage for this station. The university buildings tower over the station, including one with a massive satellite dish on the roof, and the station's signs include a sub-message showing the university's name. A quite unusual feature here is that the railway runs through the university campus, including this bridge over a former public road, John Street, which is now part of the university's internal pedestrian network. The double-track span here is concrete, unlike every other bridge on this elevated section, which are all steel. I spotted a few interesting things here. The 1910s brick clearly stands out from the 1960s extension for the triple track, which would have been plain concrete, and full points to whoever made the decision to paint that bit while leaving the lovely brickwork clean. Then over here is something which I think might be the most exciting thing I noticed on the whole line. I hope you're ready for this. It's a bit of old rail being used as a fence post. But it's not just any bit of old rail. So rail today is shaped like this. There's a flat bit that sits on the sleepers and the rounded bit on top, and the wheel sits on it like this. But if we have a look at this bit of rail, it's rounded on both sides. There's no flat bit. This is a piece of double-headed rail, which was used in the 19th century. The theory was that once the rail was worn out, you could flip it upside down and get a whole second life out of it, though apparently this theory didn't really work, because the rail sat on the sleepers in little chairs, and those chairs would cause indentations into the bottom of the rail, making a rough surface when you flipped it around to use the second side. At least, that's what I've always been told. However, what's remarkable about this piece of double-headed rail is that it shows some very definite wheel wear on both sides, showing it seemingly was flipped around and used twice, as the designers intended. Apparently, the VR stopped using double-headed rail in the 1870s and only ordered more for replacements in existing installations up until 1883, so this bit of rail is at least 140 odd years old, and possibly quite a bit older than that. The VR rarely let anything go to waste, and after using this piece of rail as a rail twice, it obviously got a third usage as a fence post, and here we are. Incidentally, there is still a short patch of double-headed rail in use on a couple of sidings in the Ballarat carriage sheds. Anyway, that was cool. I'm just going to be slightly pedantic about language for a second. This sign should say Glenferrie Railway Station, which is the British-Australian terminology. Train station is an Americanism. I'd also accept just Glenferrie Station, that would be much more to the point. I normally wouldn't care that much, but this is an educational institution. Come on, guys. As somebody who never had any railway views from my places of education, I would have killed to be able to sit down and have lunch in a spot like this. A couple more interesting things on the platform before we leave. Inside the tall bit of the island platform building is a former goods lift, the door of which is now covered by a bench, and there's this very mysterious staircase leading up and down. Near the top of the ramp, there's this place where you can look down through this hole to the ticket barriers. And I wonder if there was some practical reason for this, remembering the ticket barriers themselves wouldn't have been there when this part of the station was designed. On the island platform, there's this one very fluffy bush, which is slowly devouring one of the platform signs. On this channel, I really do try to get you coverage of parts of the railway which nobody else shows. Alright, next station time. After clearing the university, the line crosses William Street, which has steel girders similar to those at Glenferrie Road, except painted silver grey rather than the red-brown every other steel bridge on this section is painted in. Something you can see quite clearly here is that when they added the third track in the 60s, they actually built the abutments wide enough for a hypothetical future fourth track. And I didn't notice it initially, but that's actually the case at every bridge on this elevated section. Next, we're back to the lovely red-brown colour for the Henry Street Bridge, then the line crosses Auburn Road and arrives into Auburn Station, and I've got great news for you, this is basically a copy and paste of Glenferrie, with an almost identical platform and building layout. Just like Glenferrie, it's located on the eastern side of the road it's named after, and it has exactly the same origin story. Opened with the line as Auburn Road, then changed to Auburn 5 months later, and of course rebuilt with the 1910s elevation. Auburn is also not a suburb, we're now in Hawthorn East. Standing under the bridges on Auburn Road feels like a parallel universe Glenferrie, just significantly less charming because there are no trams. The island platform is slightly narrower at the road end, with only a single shop fitting between the bridges compared to Glenferrie's two. Unlike the Glenferrie alleyways, the northern side of Auburn is surrounded by a large garden, including several very well-established palm trees, which themselves are a feature of the electrification era station design. This spot is really nice. The underpass here is narrower than Glenferrie's, and instead of the ticket barriers being located here, there are marquee readers at the top of the ramp. Another little difference I noticed while walking up onto platform 3 is that here at Auburn, you can see the external brick arches from this side of the wall. Here's the same spot at Glenferrie, and there's no arches, despite an arch still being visible on the outside of the building at that location. If there are any 1910s bricklayers in the audience, please let us know why this is. Although it's a much quieter station in terms of passenger numbers, Auburn still has all the nice stuff Glenferrie has, including these waiting rooms. A lot of modern stations, especially the level crossing removal stations, are designed to look aesthetically pleasing or even dramatic from the outside, but then on the actual platforms where the actual passengers hang out, it's just like, yeah, whatever. But these stations were really designed to look just as nice inside as out. I'm gonna say it one more time, I really like these stations. After Auburn, the line crosses a small steel bridge over Albert Street, then briefly returns to ground level before entering a cutting, as we transition from the elevated bit of the 1910s regrading to the lowered bit. The line does a big S-bend on the approach to Camberwell, passing under Burwood Road again, then entering this quite unusual curved cutting. Most of the walls here are red brick, dating from when the line was lowered, and it seems like it was already wide enough for 3 tracks, as there was a siding there at the time. When the main triple track was put in the 1960s, the cutting still needed to be widened as a newly located siding was included in the new layout, along with the 3 running lines, and I'll explain that siding's purpose very shortly. You can clearly see the part which was widened, with the 1960s concrete appearing on the southern side. The line then passes onto Burke Road, carrying the 72 tram, and immediately into Camberwell Station. Camberwell has substantial brick buildings dating from when the line was lowered, and it's also had 3 platforms since that time, predating the triple track main line. The VR often used standard designs for station buildings with minor variations to fit different locations. Camberwell's buildings are a variation of the design found at Malvern, Armidale, Toorak and Hawkesburn on the quadruple track line out to Caulfield. However, Camberwell is unique in having that design but only 3 platforms. The most distinctive feature of this design is the elevated station office at the level of the footbridge, with a long wide ramp leading down to the island platform and this gradually stepping down roof above it. Camberwell is the junction for the Alamein line, which diverges away to the south about 600 metres beyond the platforms at a grade-separated junction. We're about halfway along the triple track here, and Camberwell has a number of crossovers at both ends, allowing trains to swap between the centre line and the up or down lines here. While the Alamein line has through trains to the city during peak times, during the off-peak it runs as a shuttle from Camberwell, and this shuttle is one of only 2 places in Melbourne where 3-car electric trains are still used in passenger service. The other being the Newport to Williamstown shuttle, which we looked at in my Werribee line video. I thought that was a friendly whistle for me, but it was actually for those track workers. The Alamein shuttle typically comes in and detrains its passengers on platform 2, not platform 1 as I said the last time I showed this diagram, although that is also a possible option. The train then shunts forward empty into siding A here, the one in the cutting, and this is one of the reasons the shuttle has to run as 3 cars. The siding is only 3 cars long and there's really no space to extend it. An up train from Belgrave or Lilydale will then come through on platform 1 and collect passengers for the city, followed by a down train on platform 3 dropping off passengers for Alamein, who will then be picked up by the shuttle as it returns to the platforms, then heads out over the flyover. During disruptions, up trains can terminate in either platform 1 or 2 here and return to either the down or centre line. Alamein trains can also return towards Riversdale this way as that track is bidirectional. There aren't any timetabled down trains that terminate at Camberwell, although you can do so in platforms 2 and 3. However, there are a small number of timetabled Riversdale trains which terminate there and I assume return empty to Camberwell Yard to stable. The stabling yard is a former goods yard and now holds 4 6-car trains. Unusually, one of the sidings here is separate from the others with a car park in between, and you can really see the goods yard heritage of this general layout. Continuing the trend on this line, the Route 72 tram stop is nowhere near the station entrance. It's up there somewhere. Also, I really wish there were some stairs leading straight down onto the island platform here. You have to walk all the way down to the footbridge to actually enter the station. There is, however, a fairly direct ramp down to platform 3. The footbridge on the northern side is quite wide and has this girder down the middle and also some garden beds. If, like me, you're a fan of obsolete transport agency logos, Camberwell is well worth a visit. Inside, there's a plaque celebrating the station's centenary with a Vicrail teacup logo, and down on the platforms, there are lots of these 90s era Met logos on these windbreaks. There's obviously been an attempt in recent years to cover them over with Metro Blue, but fortunately, somebody has fought back. One last fun feature is that Camberwell is one of a handful of stations to have the station signs inexplicably offset to one side of the pole. I have no idea why, but they were also like that at Narre Warren on the Pakenham line before it was rebuilt. Are there any others? For a fun Mikey barrier positioning fact, you can see here where each of these gates was shifted along slightly because the original installation had the wider accessible gate on the far right here, leading people with wheelchairs, prams and trolleys directly into this wall. Leaving Camberwell, the line passes through a fairly deep green cutting, with the Alamein line climbing up the side to the flyover, which was completed in 1959, a few years before the triple track. At the top of the flyover is a road bridge carrying Stanhope Grove, which the flyover track only just squeezes underneath, and it's a good photography spot looking back towards Camberwell. As trains for Alamein come down off the flyover, they come right past the end of the next station, East Camberwell, passing about 10 metres from the platform edge. East Camberwell is a quiet little station with a basic shelter on the island and a small weatherboard building on the down platform. This building does have a small waiting room and another surviving example of the spiky platform gate. An unusual feature here is this phone booth. Most stations, possibly all actually, have public phones, but they're usually wall-mounted or this type, not a complete standalone booth on the platform like this. East Camberwell was opened in 1900 to provide a passenger connection with the Outer Circle Railway, which passed underneath the main line here briefly from 1891 to 1893, then again from 1900, when East Camberwell was built, until 1943. In the first iteration, there was a connection towards Lilydale, but in the second era, there was no direct connection to the main line. Lots of maps also show an alignment curving towards Camberwell, and that's quite visible on modern satellite images too, though I can't find any evidence that there was ever actually a rail connection on that side. It may have just been reserved for future-proofing. The Outer Circle linked Fairfield on today's Hurstbridge line with Oakley on today's Dandenong line, although the whole thing was only open for a very brief time. After the 1900 reopening, it only went as far north as Deepdene and later East Kew. A low-level platform was provided on the Outer Circle for connecting passengers, and this gave East Camberwell the distinction of being the only station with multi-level platforms in the entire history of the VR, until the City Loop was built in the 80s, although unlike the loop stations, the platforms here weren't directly above one another. The Outer Circle passed underneath pretty much immediately at the down end of the high-level platforms, but in 2026 there's really no evidence of the cutting at all, which would have actually been below the ends of the current platforms, as they've since been slightly extended. Today, the Outer Circle is a popular rail trail, and apart from the alignment, there isn't much other evidence of the railway's presence at this particular spot. What there is, however, is this large electric substation, one of the original ones built for the railway electrification scheme in the early 1920s. The substation is located within the triangle of the 1890s curve, and early on it had a siding branching off the Outer Circle from the north. Back up the other end of the station, looking in the up direction, the centre line makes a very slight S-curve as it approaches the flyover, and has 3 different 65km/h speedboards for each part of the wiggle. I'm not sure of anywhere else with so many speedboards so close together. Something else I spotted here was this. You know those boards I explained earlier telling drivers of electric trains what position to put their master controller in? This is a later version for Harris trains, which just shows a speed to accelerate to. This one obviously said 20-something miles per hour. They normally looked like this. The Harris sets were our first suburban trains fitted with speedometers, which is why these signs wouldn't have worked for the earlier trains. After East Camberwell, the line crosses over Myrtle Road, and if you look out on the right side of the train, you might spot this interesting artefact. Did you see it? Don't worry, I went back with the big lens. This is an entire block of 4 seats from a Hitachi, which somebody must have successfully separated from the floor and shoved out the door here. This must have happened at least 17 years ago, as when the Hitachis were refurbished in 2009, these handles got painted green. I don't know what's more remarkable, that someone managed to do this in the first place, or that it's still sitting there almost 2 decades later. The line then crosses a very short bridge over Kendall Street and arrives into Canterbury, which opened with the line in 1882. It's located alongside Canterbury Road, though unlike the other such stations so far, it's not named directly after the road. Canterbury is the name of the suburb. The line originally crossed Canterbury Road on the level, but was grade separated in 1968. The resulting new station is a fairly bleak and exposed elevated situation, with the island tapering to a very narrow platform at the up end. Just before we take a proper look at this station, I do have a slightly embarrassing story to tell here. When I was in my early 20s, I was living in McLeod and had a job that occasionally involved going to Burke Road in Camberwell, which I would normally do by train via the city. On one particular occasion, I was having some, let's say, cash flow issues, not unusual, and my bank balance was sitting somewhere above the cost of a Zone 2 fare, but below that of the Zone 1 and 2 fare required for my normal trip. In order to get to Camberwell without entering Zone 1, I caught a train to Eltham, then the 902 bus to Nunawading, then another train to Canterbury, the innermost extent of Zone 2, then walked the final 2.5 kilometres into Camberwell, repeating the process in the afternoon. Anyway, Canterbury. There's a fairly basic building on the island platform which does have a reasonable shelter, and then a very small shelter on platform 3. Unusually, it's fitted with one of these vertical PIDs, which aren't very common in this sort of context. There's also a basic waiting room with wooden seats, which is actually not bad for such a small building. I think I'd be quite happy here on a rainy day. Being on the downhill side, platform 3 is quite high above ground level, perched up above the commuter car park, and is accessed by this very long ramp. To get to platforms 1 and 2 from this car park, it's a simple matter of heading up this way and... okay, that's weird. This area under the bridges at the down end is surprisingly nice. It's been planted and landscaped, and there are colourful murals on all the concrete pillars and abutments. The images actually make up a multi-panel story, Jasper and Jinx's fantastical trip, and depict a location that is noticeably Canterbury. That's a down train arriving on the centre line. If you want to find out what happens to Jasper and Jinx, you will have to visit for yourself. The ramp up to the platforms is quite unlike anywhere else in Melbourne, coming up amongst the steel bridges, and on some of the spans you can see these stencils detailing the position, orientation and weight of each girder. The top of the ramp gives a great view of the line at truck level with fairly minimal fencing. At the up end of the island platform, that very narrow bit I mentioned before, is one of the least accessible accessibility features I've ever spotted in Melbourne. Behind this overhead wiring pole is the marker for the wheelchair boarding point for all up trains. I can imagine the experience of trying to board with a wheelchair here would be pretty unnerving, if not impossible for some people, especially if there happened to be an express train passing on the other track at the same time. On the south side of the station, you can see this little patch of greenery in between the buildings. This is Theatre Place, a lovely little pedestrianised area with cafes and other shops. Before the 1960s station rebuild, this was actually the main entrance to the station, and it's a real shame the new station doesn't have an entrance here, as this is Canterbury's main town centre. But the new station directs people to the much less happening Canterbury Road, and the best route to Theatre Place involves doubling back down this alleyway. The bridges over Canterbury Road pass alongside this very interesting brick building, which is a former post office built in 1910, now a Sri Lankan restaurant. One last thing about Canterbury, on the north side of the station is a really nice public park, the Botanic Gardens, a really excellent transit accessible picnic spot, and a great place to wait if you're trying to change to the very low frequency 285 bus because you've been in Canterbury filming for a video about the Lilydale line, but you also have to go to North Balwyn to get some footage for a video about tram stops. Just around the corner, about 600 metres from Canterbury, is Chatham, which is a bit of an in-between station that I'd never paid much attention to until making this video, but it turns out to be quite interesting. It was an infill station built in 1927, opening on April Fool's Day of that year, presumably as a very elaborate joke. It was built as an island platform with a building, shelter and ramp very similar to those back up the line at Glenferrie and Auburn. Chatham postdates those stations by about 12 years, and it seems the design was pared back a little with a flatter, less decorative roof. When the third track came through in 1971, a very basic and quite narrow platform was built on the new downline, and very unusually it's offset from the island by about 80 metres, which does provide some interesting photography perspectives. Behind this platform is dense vegetation, which also surrounds the ramp up from the street. The open style of the building, combined with the presence of a few palms in amongst the lush greenery, make this spot feel weirdly tropical. Pedestrian access is from a dead-end street called Junction Road. I have no idea why it's called that, as there certainly wasn't a rail junction here or any prominent road one. The station takes its name from nearby Chatham Road, and it's a bit unusual that the namesake street doesn't go right past the station or cross the line. I guess Canterbury was already taken. By the way, most of these triple track stations don't have any electronic next train information at street level. The only way of knowing if you have to go to platform 3 rather than the island is from this type of sign, which I think looks pretty confusing and doesn't exactly help when unplanned platform changes happen. After Chatham, the line continues to gently wind through the suburbs, passing over Robinson Road on a low bridge, before descending into a level crossing removal project trench, the first of many major grade separations done by the LXRP that we're going to encounter on this line, and also one of the more extensive modern regradings on the entire network. Prior to this 2023 project, the next 1300 metres of line featured 2 stations, Surrey Hills and Mont Albert, and 2 level crossings, Union Road and Mont Albert Road. The line was lowered for this entire section, removing both crossings and, somewhat controversially, both stations. combining them into a single new station called Union, widely promoted as being in the middle of the two, but it's actually about a third closer to the site of Surrey Hills. The name Union was picked both because it's a union of the two former stations into a single entity, and also being close to Union Road, although ironically not as close to Union Road as Surrey Hills was. Personally, I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity here to name it after half of each of the old station names, either Mont Hills or, my personal preference, Surrey Albert. Surrey Hills Station opened 9 months after the line in August 1883. It was immediately next to the Union Road level crossing and was built entirely on a curve, and this is the only picture I ever took of it. Post-2023, a short section of the alignment next to the road here was decked and now has a bunch of seating, plants and a climbing thing. The trench then runs for about 300 metres, surrounded by car parks on both sides, to the new station at Union. The main thing that makes this station unusual is that it has a concourse and an entrance at both ends, compensating for its position in between the two former stations. Even just having an entrance at each end is alarmingly unusual in Melbourne, but having two actual concourses outside the inner city is unheard of. The area around the station has a lot of nice planting and landscaping, and there's a few of these guys. The Surrey Hills End concourse is the more well-equipped one, featuring a waiting room, as well as the customer service and PSO offices, housed in these buildings with a sort of prison toilet aesthetic. Fun fact, when the station was under construction, I saw one of these buildings, possibly the waiting room, on the back of a truck on the Western Freeway out near Rockbank. The entrance to the platforms is covered by a high white roof full of triangular holes, and you'll see this design repeated all around the station, including various shelters and also on the windbreaks in the middle of the island platform. The Mont Albert end has more minimal facilities, and some of the ones it does have weren't in use when I was there. The toilets were locked. There was also mud leaking out from one of the walls, which I thought was a nice feature, not one I've seen before. This motif is continued down at platform level, artfully placed at abstract intervals along the retaining walls. I can't quite decide if I like this station or not. I do actually like the triangle-y roofs, I think they look kind of cool, but overall everything's just a bit grey or white or occasionally dull green. As usual for an LXRP station, you can tell most of the effort has gone into the view from outside, the render perspective you might say, while the platforms just look incredibly dull. I'm not sure if they realise the platforms are actually where most people spend the most time. As for the concept of combining the two stations, Mont Albert and Surrey Hills were very close, and there's certainly something to be said for speeding up the running time by combining them. If you were building this line from scratch, that would almost certainly be a good idea, but I do think that in this case, the two stations had had 130 plus years of influencing local development, and like most suburban stations, the town centres of their respective suburbs had grown around them, and we're now left with two shopping strips that grew because of a station that's no longer there. Also, if the main tangible benefit of reducing the number of stations is speeding up trains, well, I went to compare some timetables from before and after the project to see how much difference this made, and the answer is absolutely none. The running time is exactly the same. But it doesn't really matter what I think about the station, it's what the locals think, and luckily at least one of them made their views on this issue quite clear. After Union, the line continues under Mont Albert Road, where I spotted something pretty cool. As of February 2026, there's a mud nest, I assume made by a mudlark, balanced on top of the overhead wiring above the upline. Good job. The cutting continues to the site of Mont Albert Station, which I fortunately do have a few photos of before it was demolished, and also this rather cracking bit of video that I may have used once or twice before. Mont Albert opened in 1890 and was at the crest of the hill, with 1 in 40 grades dropping away on both sides. There obviously wasn't much space to fit the third track in here, and the result was a very narrow island platform, so narrow in fact that the yellow lines came together and then vanished completely at the up end. Platform 1, the up platform, had a lovely weatherboard station building, which has fortunately survived the station's closure and is now surrounded by a small open public area on the decking above the line. It took me embarrassingly long to notice this when I was there, but the building isn't on its original site. It's been rotated 180 degrees and now faces the opposite direction. There's also a PTV era platform sign attached to it from the former Platform 3, which was the platform that was on this side, not the one the building is from. On a related note, one of Surrey Hills Platform 3 signs also still exists at the Kew Traffic School. Most of the building is accessible to the public, including the former platform entrance and the waiting room. On my visit, there was no obvious vandalism, and I assume that's because all the vandals have been scared off by these scarecrows in the station's new community garden. The fencing above the railway cutting has been skillfully designed to allow easy viewing and photography of passing trains. A couple of 100 metres beyond the site of Mont Albert, the cutting comes to an end and the line returns to surface level, running alongside leafy suburban streets. It crosses a small low bridge over Creswick Lane, then a much larger two-span concrete bridge over Elgar Road. The line then arrives into Box Hill, which opened with the line and has always been one of the line's busiest stations. Box Hill was originally at ground level with attractive brick buildings, but in the 1980s it was lowered into a trench and had Box Hill Central Shopping Centre built on top, becoming more of a box hole. The result is something that looks like an underground station, although it's not actually under any ground, and the outside world is clearly visible from both ends of the platforms. On a related note, this is the only station where I've noticed a specific Metro-branded "Do Not Feed the Birds" sign. Unlike a proper underground station, ventilation doesn't seem to be a major concern here, and there's nothing stopping you bringing a steam locomotive here, if you have one. Box Hill has 4 platforms. Or does it? Yeah, it does have 4 platforms, but only 3 tracks. It was obviously built future-proof to have a 4th track added in the future, and it was done to a surprisingly high effort, with the trackless Platform 1 looking almost complete and usable. I always thought it was odd just how complete the platform looks given it's never been used, until partway through making this video when I stumbled upon this excellent picture by Julian Wright, showing I was wrong about it never being used. Platform 1 was actually used for a 14-month period in 1983-84 when the line was in the process of being lowered. This was back in the days when they cared about keeping trains running throughout major projects, and the line was lowered progressively. This picture shows the new 1 and 2 in use, having been built alongside the old station, which was then dug out to create the space for platforms 3 and 4. And it wasn't until those were available that the track was removed from platform 1, leaving 2, 3 and 4 as the usable platforms, a situation that has remained to this day. Box Hill is the end of the triple track from Burnley, dropping to double track at the down end, and there are numerous crossovers here allowing quite a variety of moves. Platform 4 is for down trains only, either from the down line or the centre line. You can't terminate a train in platform 4 because there's no departure signal to head back in the up direction. Platform 3 is bidirectional, used by through trains in either direction, and can also be used to terminate trains in either direction, with access to all 3 tracks at the up end. Platform 2 is mostly just used for up trains, but can also receive a down terminating train off the centre line. There's a fixed red signal, that is, a signal that can't show anything other than red, at the down end here to allow that move, and it's not possible to continue in that direction. I don't think this move is very common at all, and I noticed that this crossover is quite rusty, which also suggests up trains on this platform almost always continue on the up line, even though they can access the centre line using that crossover. While Box Hill is commonly used for terminating trains during disruptions, there aren't actually any passenger-carrying trains that terminate here in the regular timetable, as far as I can see. Box Hill is really Melbourne's most obvious example of proper transit-oriented development, with a shopping centre directly on top of the station, connecting with a number of pedestrianised streets around the town centre. At the 2021 census, 46.6% of Box Hill's residents were recorded as having Chinese ancestry, the highest percentage of any Melbourne suburb, and the Chinese community is probably what Box Hill is best known for, with the shopping centre having a huge variety of Asian food options. On the roof of the shopping centre is a quite remarkable bus interchange served by 16 suburban bus routes plus the Eastern Express Skybus. The bus stops form a complete loop around the top of the centre and it's a really busy place. However, the interchange between buses and trains here is not exactly streamlined. With the large vertical distance and need to pass through the shopping centre, it takes about a minute and a half at my relatively fast walking speed. If you're watching closely there, you might have noticed another unusual thing about this station, which is that the entrance to the station is sort of incorporated into a McDonald's. Like, the signage for the station is actually on the McDonald's, and there's actually a service window to buy Maccas inside the station paid area as well as outside. In that example, I went via this very narrow staircase, but the platforms do also have very wide and very long ramps. There's a lift to platforms 2 and 3, but if you need step-free access to 4, the ramp is your only option. There's some really old advertising on these ramps. There's a 7-digit phone number there from the early 90s. Sticking with the 90s theme, back up near the ticket barriers is another very weird feature, a V-Line waiting room, which still has the late 90s version of the V-Line branding on it. That particular version of the logo was in use from 1995 to 1998. Thank you, Logopedia. As well as the outdated branding, the other thing that makes this notable is that there are, of course, no V-Line services that operate from here. Or are there? Well, kind of. There aren't and never have been any V-Line trains from here, but there is a V-Line bus stop out on Whitehorse Road, where the coach to Mansfield stops once a day. This is of course a pick-up only in the down direction and drop-off only in the up direction. You can't take this tour from the city. This route actually makes several other stops along the Lilydale line too, at Nunawading, Ringwood, Croydon and Lilydale. We're not quite done with other mode connections here, as Box Hill is also the terminus of the Route 109 tram, which stops on Whitehorse Road about 150 metres from the shopping centre entrance. This makes Box Hill the only station in Victoria, other than Southern Cross, which connects to a tram, suburban bus, V-Line coach and Skybus. Thanks to SYN FM for pointing out that fact.
Martin's coming with Box Hill.
Yeah,
And it's correct.
That's it, yeah.
Route 109 reached Box Hill in 2003, but it wasn't the first time there'd been an electric tram here. The short-lived Box Hill to Doncaster tramway operated from 1889 to 1896. It was the first electric tramway in the Southern Hemisphere and something that I expect would be very well used if it were reinstated today. There's also one more transport mode coming to Box Hill in the relatively near future, with construction underway for the suburban rail loop, the first stage of which will terminate here in an underground station. And if the second stage goes ahead, we'll continue north to Doncaster and beyond, finally returning rail to the route of the 1890s tramway. About 800 metres to the south of Box Hill, there was once a large brickworks, which dispatched bricks by rail via a private siding between 1888 and 1892, and then again using a new siding on a slightly different alignment between 1922 and about 1931. The second siding also had a short siding of its own, serving the Nunawading Shire Council Depot from 1925, and that survived for around a year after the main siding closed. I don't believe there's any substantial physical evidence remaining of either siding, but you can certainly still see the general alignment through the streets on satellite imagery. The brickworks buildings themselves are heritage listed and still in place, but currently still in an abandoned state and not accessible to the public. However, if we have a quick look at this 360 drone photo kindly dropped on the map by Barney Mayer, I think that could be a tiny bit of surviving track from the 1922 sighting. It's certainly in about the right place, but honestly impossible to be sure without having a closer look. If you want to read a really detailed history of the brickworks sightings, find yourself a copy of these 2 issues of Newsrail. Back up on the roof of the centre just quickly, when this place was built along with the new station in the 80s, there was a V-Line parcels office with a loading dock on the roof for transferring parcels to trains. This was in the dying days of the railway parcels service, which used dedicated electric parcels vans around the suburbs, and the service would have been obsolete here not long after the facility was built. Philip Mellis made a great video looking into this in a lot more detail, so go check that out for the rest of the story. One final Box Hill fact, this station was, I think, the last on the system to have the 1980s style cathode ray tube PIDs, which most people will remember from the city loop stations. They were still here until at least 2016 when I took these pictures, and these things make me so nostalgic. The now double-track line climbs away from Box Hill and crosses an active pedestrian crossing. This is your regular reminder that when the LXRP says the Lilydale line is level crossing free, they're only talking about road crossings. This is also an unusual spot for being completely unfenced, despite having the footpath just a few metres from the line. Unfenced sections of line aren't unusual around Melbourne, but there aren't many remaining examples in such a dense urban place as Box Hill. The next part of the line originally climbed over a short, sharp hill with 1 in 40 grades on both sides, but the top was knocked off and the railway sunk into a cutting in 2007, as part of what I would consider to be the first of the modern era of grade separations, removing the crossing with Middleborough Road and rebuilding Laburnum Station. This was not only the first grade separation to occur for many years, it was also the first one experienced by my generation of enthusiasts. It was the first time I really went out to visit a section of line that was about to change dramatically and a station that was about to be completely rebuilt, something that has become a much more common experience since. The cutting runs alongside the Box Hill Cemetery, and if you've ever wanted your final resting place to be extremely close to an operating railway line, this is probably the place for it. The cutting and new station were built with provision for the third track to be extended this way, though I don't believe there's any real plan to do so. The Middleborough Road Bridge was built with a pedestrian underpass, and a lot of these early 21st century grade separations did seem to give more consideration to pedestrians than many of the more recent projects. Laburnum Station opened in 1958, named after Laburnum Road, and is located in the suburb of Blackburn. The station isn't actually on the part of the line that was regraded in 2007, but they rebuilt it as part of the project anyway, due to it being one of the more shonky stations on the system. Pre-2007, Laburnum was on an S-bend and also at the bottom of the gradient, creating poor visibility for drivers and wildly varying platform gaps along the length of the train. The platforms passed over the Laburnum Street Bridge, and this brings us to Laburnum's apparently most famous feature, these signs painted either side of the bridge reading "Danger, toot toot, drive slowly, keep to left." Apparently these dated from at least the 70s, and the toot toot has nothing to do with trains. It's a warning to car drivers to use caution and blow their horns when passing under the bridge and around the tight curve with very low visibility. Having cars constantly using their horns here was of course infuriating for nearby residents, who apparently tried painting over the signs multiple times only for them to be restored by the council. And certainly when I took this picture in 2006, parts of it do look to be freshly repainted. The signs were removed when the whole bridge was demolished and widened as part of the 2007 station rebuilding, but they seem to be living on in some unusual ways. Google Maps shows the Toot Toot Railway Bridge as a local attraction, and it's managed to score 22 reviews, averaging 4.6 stars.
One of the best toot-toot bridges yet, not to be missed. Superb. It's hoot when you get a toot. One of the most famous bridges in the world. This is a joke review, clearly. Do not go gentle over those good tracks. Old men should rage at the rising of the line. Toot toot against the dying of the light. My mum threw a rock at a car.
Google reviews only started in 2007, the same year the old bridge and signs were removed, and all the reviews are from the past 8 years. So it is curious that somebody bothered listing this so long after it ceased to exist, even as a joke. Laburnum Station today is not especially exciting. It was rebuilt with dead straight platforms and a gap in the middle for the hypothetical third track, and the buildings are just very basic structures without any notable features other than being blue. On the north side of the line is a small gravel car park, and I don't think there are many other unpaved station car parks left in the suburbs. Not far from the bridge is a nice little set of shops and cafes surrounded by trees, and it couldn't be more different to Box Hill, which is still less than 2 kilometres away. Just around the corner is Blackburn, which opened in 1882. Blackburn has 3 platforms, 1 and 3 are for up and down trains respectively, and 2 is normally for terminating trains, though it can also take down through trains. Quite a lot of trains terminate here, with the pattern for most of the day featuring local trains to Blackburn, with Belgrave and Lilydale trains running to limited express patterns between here and the city. However, it's not that simple, and this line actually has one of the most complicated and unpredictable timetables of any railway on the planet that I'm aware of. According to this analysis by Daniel Bowen, there are as many as 19 different stopping patterns between the city and Ringwood. The current buildings at Blackburn date from the 80s and are that reasonably boring brick type, though the one on the island platform is quite substantial and has a walk-through waiting room. Outside platform 3 are a couple of date palms, which I'd suggest probably date from well before the building. In 2017, the underpass was rebuilt by the LXRP as part of the very nearby Blackburn Road grade separation, which we'll look at in a moment. The new underpass has large open ramps at both ends, as well as some garden beds with native planting. The walls are clad with a white steel mesh, which is not very charming. And the works also involved installation of a couple of lifts, one on the island platform and one outside the station on the northern side, though weirdly there isn't one on the south side. What there is on the south side is this small brick building, which looks like it might have once had a short platform, possibly a small goods shed or parcels office. Please let us know if you know what this is. While the frequency from here is mostly pretty good, if you do need something to do while waiting for the train, there is this small entertainment facility. The 2017 grade separation involved dropping the railway under Blackburn Road, which was just possible without modifying the station. The descent starts pretty much immediately from the platform ends. An interesting thing about this particular separation is that the railway previously climbed away from Blackburn on a 1 in 40 grade for just over the next kilometre, so it wasn't possible to return the new trench to ground level straight after the road without dramatically increasing that gradient. The result is a 1,200 metre long trench to the top of the hill, which also included grade separating 2 pedestrian crossings, which I'm sure they wouldn't have been bothered doing unless they absolutely had to. The Blackburn Road Bridge has a hostile grey barrier preventing decent photography, unless you use a camera with a very small lens. Continuing east, after the line leaves the long trench, it levels out again into the next station, Nunawading. This station opened in 1888 as Tunstall, which was the name of the nearby village at the time, but in 1945 both the town and station were renamed Nunawading, which had previously been the name for the broader area. Like Laburnum, Nunawading is another example of an early modern grade separation done before the LXRP was formed and was lowered below Springvale Road in 2010. The station was relocated to the west side of the road, and you can clearly see the slight slough to the north from the original alignment, done to allow construction to progress while the old station was still in place. I did visit Old Nunawading a few times, but only ever took this one picture from the window of a passing car in December 2006. The thing I really like about New Nunawading is that while the main station building is on the west side of the road, they built a substantial second entrance on the east side connected by a pedestrian underpass, giving grade-separated access to Nunawading's 3 connecting bus routes, the 273 and 735 and the 902 orbital route. This is really good and something that's conspicuously missing from a lot of projects done since. There are lots of more recent separations where the context is almost identical. Places like Hughesdale on the Dandenong line, where the road carries a busy bus route, but connecting passengers have to cross the road on the level. It's my very strong opinion that every grade separation with an adjacent station should include passenger access from both sides of the road like this, and for places with connecting bus routes, it should be non-negotiable. Another interesting thing here is that the northern side of the cutting is vertical and concrete, while the southern side, the bit that was dug out from under the old alignment, is sloped and dirt. And quite a lot of vegetation has popped up alongside the platform in the 16 years since the separation was done. Here's a view from the same spot in 2011. The roofs over both entrances have a timber finish, which I think looks quite nice, and the main concourse area has this central skylight section made up of inflated plastic pillows, which are also a feature of the roof at Southern Cross. The main building has a waiting room, and it's a bit of an unusual one where its position makes it a lot more useful as a waiting room for buses rather than trains. After climbing out of the Nunawading Trench, trains return to ground level for just 300 metres before dropping down into the next grade separation, this one done in 2014 and running for about 1100 metres, separating Brooks Road, Calcutta Street and Mitcham Road, as well as rebuilding Mitcham Station. Between the first 2 road bridges, the line does climb up slightly back towards ground level, just enough for passengers to get a glimpse of another historic substation. Just like the one at East Camberwell, this was built as part of the original scheme and would have come into use when the section between Box Hill and Ringwood was electrified in 1923. The large number of rail under grade separations, especially these longer trenches running under multiple roads, treat Lilydale line passengers to a wide variety of views that passengers on the Skyrail lines can only dream of, and I think this might be a good point to sit back and really appreciate some of the visual variety that the modern Lilydale line has to offer. I hope you enjoyed all that grey because there's plenty more of that colour at Mitcham, another station from the line's opening in 1882. I visited Mitcham on a day where the sky was the same colour as the station, so apologies if it's difficult to tell them apart at times. The eastern end of the station is dominated by a maze of very long ramps and stairs, and in contrast to Nunawading's excellent cross-street connection, Mitcham doesn't even have a connection to the near side of the street. I'm serious, that's Mitcham Road right there behind that wall. Like, what the actual... Ugh. So if you're wanting to leave the station to the east here via the ramp, you have to do this, which is over 200 metres from the platform to the street. You could almost halve that distance if there was a gate here. The main and only entrance is in the middle and does at least have a little bit of colour involved, with a blue waiting room and ticket office, and there is a wooden ceiling here too. Given my failure to reach Mitcham Road directly, I thought I'd try getting there from the north side of the station, only to find, maybe through here? Finally. There are 7 bus routes from Mitcham Station and another very close by, and the connectivity from the bus bays to the station at least seems to be pretty good. Back at ground level, the line enters a long straight section lined with trees, and there's a bike track running along the southern side, including this parallel bridge across Cochrane Street. Just over 900 metres after leaving the Mitcham Trench, we get to... do you want to guess? Yeah, it's another LXRP trench, this time dropping down to Heatherdale, which opened in September 1958. 2 months after Laburnum, making it the last new station to be built on the line. Well, the last one until Union, that is. It was grade separated in 2017, and it's a bit of an unusual one where most of the cutting on both sides is exposed dirt. The pre-separation station was on the west side of Heatherdale Road and was also in a much shallower cutting. Unfortunately, this is the only picture I ever took of it. Heatherdale isn't a suburb name, it seems to be a semi-formalised name referring to the shops and immediate neighbourhood around Heatherdale Road, which itself is the border between the suburbs of Mitcham and Ringwood. The new lowered station was built on the east side of the road, making this a very unusual example of a station that has moved suburbs. I'm sure there are other examples where suburb boundaries have changed, but I can't think of any others where the station itself has moved into a different suburb. I kind of surprised myself by liking this station. It doesn't tick many of the boxes for the sort of station I'd normally like, but I think the location makes this station quite interesting. While the up end of the platforms are in the cutting, the down end is at ground level and gives quite an impressive elevated view across to Mount Dandenong, something we're going to see a lot of along the line from now on. Apart from the shops, the station is surrounded by car parks and car yards, and it's also directly underneath a high voltage transmission line. The LXRP grey is broken up by quite a lot of blue, and the station has a number of glass panels with images of blue or purple native flowers. Here's a chocolate lily and a spotted sun orchid, and over here a flax lily and a waxlip orchid. The view to Mount Dandenong from the end of the platform really is quite nice, and you probably won't even notice that you're looking towards a freeway here. The train in this picture is on the bridge crossing over Eastlink, which was cut under the line in 2007, and this might be a good moment to appreciate the efficiency of rail transport. Just going on rough numbers, the railway here is capable of moving something like 16,000 people per hour in each direction, while the road below can only move maybe 6,000, despite taking up roughly 8 to 10 times more space. You might have missed this subtle messaging in some of my other videos so far, but trains are really, really good. After Eastlink, the line climbs back up on 1 in 40 grades once again over New Street on a small concrete bridge, and then crossing over Wantirna Road into Ringwood, which opened with the line in 1882 and became the junction for the line to Upper Ferntree Gully, today's Belgrave line, in 1889. Ringwood has 3 platforms and a pretty flexible track layout. Platform 3 takes down trains heading for either Lilydale or Belgrave. It can also terminate an up train from Lilydale, but that train can't access the up line to the city from there. There's a fixed red signal at the up end of Platform 3 to allow this terminating move. Platform 2 is fully bidirectional and can take through trains in either direction, to and from either line, and it can also terminate any train in either direction. Platform 1 can't be accessed from the city, but can take up trains from either line, and also terminate up trains on either line. At the down end of the station is a large but surprisingly compact stabling yard branching off the up Lilydale line. Accessible from all 3 platforms, it consists of 6 sidings, all capable of holding 2 6-car trains each. Platform 3 has a very attractive and historic brick building. According to this very helpful plaque, it was built in 1889 when the branch to Upper Ferntree Gully was opened, and is considered to be the oldest surviving building in Ringwood today. It's been extended in the up direction multiple times over the years, which has been done fairly tastefully in more or less matching red brick. Even the PSO pod has been painted to match. Over on the island platform there's a smaller weatherboard building, with an enclosed waiting room in one end and a small shop in the other. Back on Platform 3, the 1889 building's waiting room is still in use as an entrance to the platform and is home to the ticket office, but doesn't contain any seats for actual waiting. Out the front of the station is a preserved signal box, which was built in 1926, not long after the line was electrified. It contained a 70-lever frame and was originally located on the down end of the island platform, but was moved here and restored during a major renovation of the station area in 2015. This road here is for the exclusive use of buses accessing the station bus interchange, and the pedestrian crossing stays green for foot traffic by default, only changing to red when a bus actually approaches. This is of course excellent to have such good priority for pedestrians, though as a side effect there's a very upbeat soundscape to the immediate area, with the buttons almost constantly making the green noise. Okay, I wasn't actually quite finished talking about the signal box that bus just interrupted. The restoration has made this box appear quite a bit more majestic than it did when it was operating, as it used to just sit on the island platform with quite a distinct sag in the middle, and the new brick foundation is a bit higher than platform level and really makes the box stand out. The top level where the signallers would have worked is unfortunately not open to the public, but the bottom level is occupied by a shop. There's actually a half-scale recreation of this signal box at the Diamond Valley Railway in Eltham, with its own functioning miniature lever frame. As part of the 2015 station redevelopment, a large new footbridge was built spanning the platforms and the bus interchange. It's an open design, letting in lots of light, and also apparently lots of rain, so they later added this little shelter for the barrier staff to stand in on wet days. A slightly frustrating aspect of this design is that they went to the trouble of continuing the bridge over the bus interchange, which, as mentioned before, doesn't provide much of a barrier to pedestrians anyway, but then they didn't make it continue over the Maroondah Highway, which certainly does create a barrier to pedestrians walking between the platforms and this station's main trip generator, Eastland Shopping Centre. Although, as part of the station rebuild, they did reduce the width of the road and gave better priority to the pedestrian crossing, so it's not all bad. Like many suburban stations, there was once a small goods yard here, which included a short siding at the far up end of the yard, known as Siding E. The buffer at the end of Siding E was just before the 4-metre drop down onto Montana Road. The sort of place where, if you're designing a model railway, you'd really want to make sure that buffer was extremely solid. Luckily, this was never, ever a problem. On the 11th of February 1908, Suburban's steam tank locomotive EE478 overshot the siding and ended up in an embarrassing situation halfway down the embankment. On the 29th of January 1969, electric locomotive L1157 overshot the siding and ended up in an embarrassing situation hanging out over the road. After that, a much larger buffer was installed. On the 8th of December 1992, a Comenge suburban train overshot the siding and ended up in an embarrassing situation on top of the new buffer. The whole siding was removed after that. On the 14th of November 2025, while I was working on this video, my HO scale model of Victorian Railways parcels van 1CM overshot a similar siding on my layout and ended up in an embarrassing situation above my computer. Luckily, there were no injuries. I was pleased to discover that there is still some evidence of one of these derailments today. If you look very carefully at the top of the concrete abutment over Wanturna Road, you can quite clearly see L1157's flange marks from the 1969 version of this accident. At the down end of the station, trains cross Warrandyte Road on a triple-track steel bridge before passing the junction to the Belgrave line, then running between the stabling yard and Ringwood Lake Park, which is a really nice little patch of bushland, and it's easy to forget you're tucked in between a highway and a busy suburban railway line here. This is a bit of a taster of things to come, as despite still being surrounded by continuous suburbia, almost the entire rest of the line from here is lined with trees, making the railway look a lot more isolated than it actually is. The line climbs away from Ringwood on another 1 in 40 grade, before dropping into the most recent LXRP trench on the line for Ringwood East, which was lowered in 2024, and in fact every remaining station on the line from here to Lilydale is now an LXRP station. Ringwood East was an infill station opened in 1925, and prior to the grade separation was a fairly unremarkable island platform with one of those dull 80s brick buildings. The grade separation here removed the level crossing with Dublin Road, and in true LXRP style, the new bridge gives a fantastic view of the trains running past below. The new station is, perhaps surprisingly, quite high effort given the relatively quiet location. It has entrances on both sides at both ends, more than you can say for somewhere like Mitcham. The ones at the up end are relatively minor with no way to cross between them, but the down end has a concourse bridging the trench. This station has a distinct colour scheme, with earthy brown elements worked into most of the design, and this extends to the colour of the concrete paths around the station, which I think is a nice little touch and makes a big difference. We know the LXRP's favourite colour is grey, and it must have taken great courage to break away from that for this little detail. There's also a lot of native planting around the whole site, far more than at most other new stations, so it should look great and have quite a bit more shade in years to come. And it's extra important that there are nice places to wait here, as now we're on the other side of Ringwood, the off-peak frequency here is frustratingly bad. At least I have 25 minutes to appreciate this cool turtle shell. Down on the platform, the browns and golds are continued on some parts, but the grey really starts to take over again. A lot of the more recent post-COVID stations have these touch-free lifts, which operate entirely by mind control.
Call placed.
Going down. Doors closing. Platform. Doors opening. Going up. Doors closing.
The name Ringwood East has an unusual distinction. It's the only station name on the suburban network with a cardinal direction which appears after the suburb name, compared to 13 stations with a cardinal direction before the suburb name. If we expand that to include the whole of Victoria, there are only 3 stations with the cardinal direction as a suffix and 17 as a prefix. And if we expand it to include all stations which historically existed on the Victorian Railways in 1949, it's 9 prefixes versus 31 suffixes. I was curious about why there's apparently no real consistency here, and also why it's so much more common to have it as a prefix, so I did some more digging. You might want to grab another cup of tea and make yourself comfortable for this one. There are broadly 3 different reasons why a station gets a cardinal direction in the name, and it just so happens that there's one of each example on this line. In some cases, it's because it's named after an actual suburb or town. Ringwood East is an example of this. It's named after the actual suburb called Ringwood East, which is a distinct locality from Ringwood. But then you get stations which are simply named due to being towards one side of a suburb or town. East Camberwell is an example of this. There's no suburb called East Camberwell. The station is just in the eastern part of Camberwell. The third reason, which is kind of a variation of the second reason, is if the station just happens to be in a certain direction from another station with the main suburb name. East Richmond is an example of this. There's no suburb called East Richmond. The station is just east of Richmond Station, which itself is only half in the suburb of Richmond, and East Richmond isn't in the eastern part of Richmond, or in fact even in Richmond at all. It's in Cremorne. Just for fun, there's also a West and North Richmond, which are at least on the western and northern boundaries of the suburb respectively. Forgetting about railways for a second, suburbs and towns in Victoria can be named with the cardinal point on either side of the name, but it's vastly more common for it to be a suffix. The railways preference, however, is the other way around. So, as a very general rule, if the cardinal direction is a suffix, the station is probably named after an actual place, like Ringwood East. But if it's a prefix, it's probably a name the railways just picked, like East Richmond or East Camberwell. However, around the state there are exceptions in both directions, including cases of a station having the opposite name to the actual location. For instance, East Malvern Station is in the suburb of Malvern East. Though to be fair, I think the station predated the suburb name there, so it's not the railway's fault. So all up, I think we can divide these stations into 7 categories. There are stations with a suffix cardinal direction located in a place of the same name, stations with a prefix cardinal direction located in a place of the same name, stations with a prefix where the place they're located in doesn't have a cardinal direction, as above but the station also isn't located within that suburb, station with a suffix where the place it's located in doesn't have a cardinal direction, stations with a prefix where the suburb or town has the cardinal direction but the other way around, station which is named after an actual place but is not located within the boundaries of that place, and for maximum points, stations which are not within the boundaries of the place they're named after and have the cardinal direction at the opposite end. So, point is, Ringwood East is one of only 8 Victorian stations in this category, only 3 of which still exist, and of those, it's the only one in suburban Melbourne. Heading east from Ringwood East, the line passes under Eastfield Road, then continues east along the well-vegetated alignment, curving slightly to the north and crossing Mount Dandenong Road on a large concrete bridge. The line then arrives into Croydon, which was elevated at the same time as Ringwood East was lowered, and an unusual station that I didn't ever get off at or take a single picture of before the grade separation. Croydon opened with the line in 1882 and was initially called Warrandyte, despite being located about 8 kilometres southeast of the town of Warrandyte, which didn't and still never has had a station of its own. The suburb name of Croydon wasn't well established in 1882, and the station was probably considered to be in the southern part of the general Warrandyte area. However, it seems like even then people thought the choice of name was odd, and a local landholder managed to get the area named Croydon after his wife's birthplace in England, and the station was renamed Croydon 2 years after opening in 1884. There are quite a lot of other Croydon stations around Australia. As well as the Melbourne one, there's a Croydon in Sydney and Adelaide, as well as one in outback Queensland, and just to add to the confusion if you're Googling it, there's also a remote sheep station called Croydon Station in the Pilbara in WA. There's actually no Croydon station in the original Croydon in London, but there is a West, South and East Croydon. The elevation of Croydon removed a level crossing with Coolstore Road and also generally rearranged the roads in the immediate area, with Lacey Street becoming the through road, and also allowing Devon Street to cross under the line. Those familiar with the Upfield line stations of Moreland and Coburg might notice a strong similarity to the appearance of New Croydon at platform level. It has this same general layout with the tapered wall along the edge with recesses for benches. You may be aware that a small number of Extrapolis trains have names, and by coincidence I arrived into Croydon on board Croydon West, which is named after Croydon West Primary School. The station has entrances at both ends and the staircases are quite nice and filled with light, but once you get down underneath it's mostly all just LXRP's favourite colour again. There is a weather-sealed waiting room down here, probably not a bad idea given... Hold on. There we go. There isn't a single departure listed here that's single-digit minutes away. Croydon is a very large bus interchange with 11 proper routes plus a flexi ride. Externally, the station does have a bit more colour to it, similar in some ways to Ringwood East. I think they really should have continued the decoration along the viaduct in the down direction where it passes over Lacey Street. It also would have been a great place to promote the presence of public transport with the station name, rather than where they actually put it at 90 degrees underneath. The elevated platforms give us another great view across the suburb to Mount Dandenong, something that wouldn't have been the case here previously. After Croydon, the line returns to ground level, continuing to gently wind through leafy suburbia and passing under the Dorset Road Bridge. Just beyond this bridge was the site of a very unusual derailment on the 3rd of January 2013. It was 37 degrees Celsius when a Hitachi suburban train encountered a heat buckle, with 4 of the 6 cars ending up in the dirt. It's not my aim to list all significant accidents in this series of videos, but there's a few interesting aspects to this one which I think are worth mentioning. For starters, it's an extremely rare example of a passenger train derailing mid-section on a straight bit of main line without any points and without hitting any objects. The other interesting part of this is that this was the final full year of operation for the Hitachis, and regardless of the level of damage, this train was withdrawn after the derailment and never ran again. The reason I mention this is that about 7 hours before the derailment, I was at Flinders Street and took these pictures of the same train, potentially the last pictures ever taken of it in service. A little further on, the line crosses Bushy Creek, then arrives into Murrelbark, which opened in 1887 and was LXRP'd upward in 2021. Murrelbark is the end of the double track from the city, with the remainder of the line to Lilydale from here single track. That's right, we're almost there. Up trains from Lilydale can only use platform 1, and down through trains normally use platform 2. The signalling does allow them to use 1, though I can't imagine many scenarios where you'd need to do that. The crossover at the up end allows down trains to terminate in platform 1 and return to the city, which happens regularly during the peaks. Unusually, the track layout here was basically unchanged by the grade separation, with the only significant difference being the distance between the platforms and the start of the single track. The double track now continues a short distance around the corner, while the points were previously just beyond the platforms. I only visited ground level Murrelbark once in 2011, and it still had a nice weatherboard building on the up platform. Unlike the previous 2 stations, New Murrelbark has just a single entrance at the up end. The platform is fairly unremarkable, though I'll certainly give some points for the fairly decent shelter, which runs for most of the length. There's a concourse area underneath the platform at the up end, and the underside of the station's structure has been lined with timber, and several of the buildings, including the PSO pod, are lined with stone. Having surfaces that are not grey really does make a huge difference to these spaces, and I would love to see this kind of thing to be more widespread at new stations. This next part has another one of those pressurised transparent pillow skylights like the one at Nunawading, and here you can actually see the pipes keeping them filled with air. I'm not sure what the benefits of these are versus a solid transparent surface, but it must be something if it's worth keeping them maintained. Beyond the ticket barriers, there's a nice little courtyard area with a garden bed, and hopefully that little eucalypt will grow up nice and tall between the viaducts. Next to the station is this very large multi-deck structure. I'm not exactly sure what you're supposed to do here, but it is fairly well positioned for filming trains coming across Manchester Road into the station. They really could have made this spot a bit more hospitable for train watching, maybe a bench and a few plants. If you're very fast, like I am, it is possible to jog to the other end and get a shot of the same train departing. You might have noticed this is one place where the LXRP went to some effort to make the overhead wiring poles aesthetically pleasing with this angled design, something that appears at some new elevated stations but not all of them. While I was up here, I started wondering what this enormous black scaly protrusion is sticking out the top of the station. So I went around to the other side and it's a clock tower. The clock is a fully digital representation of an analog clock, and I feel pretty confident in saying this is the smallest and least significant station in Victoria to ever have a clock tower. Despite the pretty weird design, I'm definitely pro clock towers overall, so I guess this is kinda cool. Being fully digital though, I wonder if it would have been more useful to have next train departures shown up there, which you could see from the cafes across the road. Anyway, back underneath, there's this section of glass fencing which has some silhouettes of native flora and fauna made out of sliced up historic timetables and railway photographs. Okay folks, we are nearly there. Next stop is Lilydale. The single track line climbs away from Murrelbark, running past more leafy backyards and alongside an increasingly steep hillside. There's a short concrete bridge over Murrelbark Road, which rather unusually is a signalised single lane section for road traffic, and this is another bridge with enough notoriety to have earned itself a few Google reviews.
Wowee! Nothing screams excitement like playing chicken with oncoming traffic at this legendary eastern suburbs bottleneck. This situation is proof that COVID was not engineered by the government. Mind the potholes. They seem to have started a family.
Fix this intersection, Bridget.
Glorious combination of a low bridge, which sculpts unsuspecting truck drivers, potholes, and a nearby battle-scarred safety rail. This suburban attraction is a worthwhile destination for any traveller or tourist wishing to tick off that bucket list.
Just across the road, there's a very traditional suburban fish and chip shop. Very handy if you get hungry while waiting to see a truck get stuck under the bridge. Beyond here, the line very suddenly changes character, leaving the houses and most of the lineside vegetation behind as we climb out onto the open hillside of Cave Hill. Compared to the rest of the line, which has been continuously varying gradients ever since we crossed the Yarra back at Hawthorn, Cave Hill is a very distinct peak with continuous 1 in 40 grades on both sides. The line runs alongside a large former limestone quarry, the original construction of which apparently obliterated the cave after which the hill is named. Today, the quarry is slowly being filled in, and there's a proposal to build a new suburb on this site, including a new station to serve it, though I don't know how likely that is to actually happen, given it's only a kilometre down the hill to Lilydale. The quarry buildings are heritage listed and form a really interesting backdrop to the line here. From the train, you get a few glimpses into the quarry pit, as well as a great close-up view of the buildings as you roll past. As the line rolls down into suburban Lilydale, it, until very recently, passed over a level crossing with Melbourne Avenue, which I happen to have this before shot of. This crossing was closed to cars completely, being replaced with a quite heavy-duty pedestrian subway. Having not been here for a few years, I initially assumed this was done as part of the Lilydale grade separation in 2021, which starts just a couple of 100 metres away, but Melbourne Avenue was actually done later, removed in 2024. Lilydale opened as the terminus of the line in 1882, but became a through station 6 years later when the line was extended on to Yarra Glen and Healesville. In 1901, it became a junction when the line to Warburton opened, and in 1925, Lilydale became the terminus of the electrification from the city, effectively making it the border between suburban and country operation. The Warburton line was relatively short-lived, closing in 1965, while the Healesville line was cut back to Coldstream in 1981, then closed completely in 1991, returning Lilydale to its former terminus status. The pre-grade separation station was located on the north side of a level crossing with the Maroondah Highway, and the building actually survived the process almost completely, so we'll take a closer look at that in a minute. The new elevated station was built to the south, spanning the highway and also John Street, which was actually already a bridge before the project. The main Lilydale shopping strip runs alongside the highway to the east of the former level crossing site, and is a handy spot to restock on all the most essential supplies you'll need during a day out watching trains. You can just see the new station down there. And it's so nice that now the level crossing is gone, there's absolutely nothing dividing the town in half here anymore. If you want to get to the shops on the other side, it's a 300 metre gap between pedestrian crossings here. A unique distinction of the station being relocated as a terminus is that it resulted in the overall passenger carrying length of the line being reduced by about 280 metres. As of April 2026, Google Maps was still showing the station at the old location, causing the journey planner to show a 5-minute walk to locations that are actually now right next to the station. Crucially, this is also showing as a 6-minute walk for bus transfers, as the bus stops have been moved, and this would be enough to break some connections. I submitted a correction for this a couple of months ago, but at the time of recording, it's still showing in the wrong place. Hopefully it's fixed by the time you're watching this. New Lilydale is an island platform with both tracks continuing down past the old station to the existing stabling yard, consisting of 1 short siding and 4 long sidings, capable of holding a total of 9 6-car trains, as well as 1 long unelectrified siding for the sole use of storing diesel works trains and track machines. There are no crossovers beyond the platform, so each siding is only accessible from one platform or the other, and the layout doesn't allow a locomotive to run around here. New Lilydale was built at the same time as New Murrelbark, and the two stations share a lot of design elements. At platform level, there's the same style of shelter with the same black steel supports, and it also has the angled overhead structures. Just like Croydon and Heatherdale, there are great views across to Mount Dandenong from here, and if you walk to the far down end of the platform near the lift, there's a convenient window with views down to the old station and yard and out to the Yarra Ranges in the distance. Underneath, just like Murrelbark, there's the same timber ceiling beams and stone-clad buildings. At the up end, there's what kind of looks like a skate park, but it's got those anti-skating notches, so I think it's just like some really gungy seating. The most direct way back to the platform from here is fenced off. Presumably a fence was cheaper than putting a marquee reader here. The sign on this gate warns that it leads to a staff-only area, However, if it happened to be unlocked and you happened to walk through it, you might find it says the same thing going the other way. Another thing this station has in common with Muralbark is a large black structure thrusting skyward from the platform. However, this one isn't a clock tower, it's actually an artwork. Wind of Lilydale takes weather data from the Lilydale region and runs it through an algorithm to produce abstract visualizations, which change depending on the weather. It wasn't actually working when I took most of my footage here, but luckily it was working again the next time I came past. I do think this is quite an interesting feature, and it's very visible from a lot of the surrounding area. Lilydale is also a fairly major bus interchange, including being the departure point for the permanent replacement bus services to Healesville and Warburton, and I think someone might have accidentally put this one through the wash. As I mentioned before, the old station building and most of the platform is still in place to the north of the highway. It's a lovely timber building dating from 1914 and still retains a lot of fittings from when it was in use, including some signs, security cameras and lighting. One reason this building is so large is that it contained a refreshment room, which the Victorian Railways operated at strategically placed major stations all around the state. Time was allowed here for passengers on the Healesville and Warburton lines to purchase food and drink from the refreshment rooms before continuing on their journey. And it was a practice which continued into the late 70s, when country trains started having onboard buffet cars instead. In the early days of electrification, many passenger trains on the Healesville and Warburton lines were operated as E-trains, a practice which involved the country carriages being hauled from the city by a pair of back-to-back suburban electric swing-door motor cars. At Lilydale, the motors would cut off and shunt to the yard, the train would be split in two, and a pair of waiting steam locomotives would continue on to the unelectrified branch lines. I was lucky enough to travel on a recreation of an E-train in 2003 using the two preserved swing door cars and a pair of ABU country cars, something which will sadly never happen again, not just due to the track layout changes, but also because these two beautiful cars were destroyed in an arson attack in 2015. Back then, Lilydale really felt like a proper old VR station, with parts of the former goods yard still intact. And we can also see a significant cultural change here, where passengers on the tour were allowed to hop down off the platform and wander around in the yard taking pictures, something that would become unthinkable within just a few years. The general arrangement here stayed pretty unchanged through the 2010s right up until the grade separation, but now that area has changed completely, with the ramp coming down from the new station passing between the old platform and the goods shed. It's not obvious from the outside, but the goods shed is actually home to the Yarra Valley Model Railway Club and is filled by their large HO scale layout of Bacchus Marsh and Ballarat. On the other side of the building, which was the former Platform 1, there's some track visible in the garden bed. However, it's quite clearly not the actual track, being too high, not the right gauge, and there aren't any sleepers. It's just bits of rail sitting on concrete blocks. There's also this bit of rail being eaten by an oak tree. I don't have much to go on to date this exactly, but I reckon it must have been there for at least ages. Give or take a few years. Even though I've become pretty desensitized to losing historic old stations to the LXRP, this one does make me feel quite sad. I really liked this station. It had a very tangible history and character, and I guess warmth that I certainly don't feel at the new station. Despite the temp fencing, it does look like the building is being cared for, and I believe there is a plan to lease it out to community organisations, though I can't see any obvious progress on that. While the Healesville and Warburton lines both obviously closed a long time ago, they're not completely devoid of life. The entire length of the Warburton line is now a very popular rail trail, and I did ride the whole length of it one time when I was a bit younger and fitter. I've also travelled on it by other means. If you're not sure what you're looking at in this footage, stay tuned, I'll probably make a video about it one day. The far end of the Healesville line has been restored by volunteers and operates as the Yarra Valley Railway. For many years, they have run trains out of Healesville over a 4-kilometre stretch of line to the other end of the tunnel near Tarrawarra, though at the time I'm completing this video, they are not currently running trains as they focus on restoration of the line between Tarrawarra and Yarra Glen. Separately, progress has begun on building a rail trail from Lilydale towards Yarra Glen, with the first stage opening in 2020. So eventually, it will be possible to travel along the full length of the alignments of both of these lines again, one way or the other. The pedestrian route from Lilydale station to the start of the Warburton Trail originally just ran alongside the stabling yard through this sort of gateway arch, which I think may be designed to look like a wooden trestle bridge support. I just went this way from memory, but I don't think it's really the recommended public path anymore. Yeah, definitely not. This is what's left of the bridge over the Olinda Creek, and last time I came here in 2010, the actual bridge was still there, complete with a footpath, and the track was still in place for the Healesville line, which just connected to the end of one of the sidings. In fact, the track remained on this part of the Healesville line right up until the rail trail conversion started in 2020. The last part of this line to see any use was the short section from Lilydale to Coldstream, which still had occasional goods traffic into 1991. However, there was one final attempt to run a passenger train towards Healesville. By accident. Sometime on the night of the 28th of November 1991, a 6-car Hitachi train, which was stabled in Lilydale Yard, approximately where this Hitachi is in my 2010 photo, was left with insufficient handbrakes applied and rolled away, breaking down the gate and rolling off into the countryside through the night, passing over 2 level crossings and coming to a halt on a short gradient 1.5 kilometres away, about halfway to Coldstream. The missing train was only noticed when the station master arrived to work around 4 AM and spotted the suspiciously empty siding and suspiciously demolished gate. A diesel locomotive had to be dispatched to retrieve the train back to Lilydale, and the line was formally booked out of service 11 days later, never to see a train again. Even now, with the bridge deck removed, which happened sometime between the 2022 and 2023 Google Earth imagery, the end of the siding still pokes out under the gate, pointing tantalisingly towards Healesville, and it is still a gate. It looks like you could probably still open it if you wanted to, say, roll an X-trap into the creek. I do have some good news about this spot though. If you really need to, it is still possible to cross over the Olinda Creek by rail. One last interesting thing here is that the overhead wires still terminate on the far side of the creek, and you can still see the rails here too, almost completely buried. On the far side of the Beresford Road level crossing, there's one last bit of surviving track, and this is the site of the junction, now the junction for the 2 rail trails. There's a surviving semaphore signal post, which would have been the home signal coming in off the Healesville line. Alright, we are so close to the end, but you don't think you can leave without me showing you one more interesting piece of old rail, do you? I was just about to leave the junction when I spotted this, another much longer piece of double-headed rail, serving some sort of unknown purpose. I think I can make out a date stamp on this one, an 83, which might be something else, but that would be consistent with the last year the VR allegedly installed any double-headed rail, 1883. What an absolute specimen. On the way back to the station, I did discover there is a proper path you can take, so you don't need to go the way I did if you don't want to. Okay, that's it, we're done. This video has been the 4th in my series looking at Melbourne's suburban lines in excessive detail. If you enjoyed this and haven't seen the others, please make sure to check out the full playlist linked below. These videos are only possible because of my incredible supporters on Patreon. Without them, I would be physically unable to spend the time I do on these projects. If you'd like to help support the channel, see your name in the credits and find out what I'm working on, including which line will be next in this series, please consider heading over to patreon.com/tateset where you can join up for just a few dollars a month. All support is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for watching.
The next station is Lilydale. This train will terminate at Lilydale.